Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, good morning and welcome to a new week of Politics with Sam and the podcast that brings you up to speed with everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes. And my goodness, have things moved quickly since we last spoke. Or as Donald Trump might say, there's been great television over the weekend. Well, this morning, here's a great podcast to get you going with a lot to pack in.
Thoughts and prayers for those of you listening at 1.5 speed or above, but we are good slow. It is Monday, March the 3rd, a new month, a whole new set of priorities for the government. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. I'm alongside Sam Coates from Sky News. And this morning, like everyone else, we're digesting the incredible turn of events of the last 96 hours or so, and we map out where it's likely to go next.
I have spent all weekend, first outside Downing Street and then outside Lancaster House, as Keir Starmer frankly seemed to make himself the global man of the moment. He's pretty much the head, alongside President Macron of France, of the coalition of the willing. We'll discuss what that means in a moment. It was chilly outside, but warmer inside those meetings. Starmer watched on Friday as that lunchtime meltdown took place in the Oval Office between President Zelenskyy and President Trump and JD Vance, but seized the initiative off the back of it and spent weekend as the mediator for all sides. He cashed in on his... he basically cashed in his diplomatic chips of a successful visit to the White House on Thursday to be able to pick up the phone multiple times to President Trump. He invited President Zelenskyy for a summit on Saturday, and then on Sunday hosted 18 fellow European leaders and senior figures in central London to agree a way forward. And today this all matters because he'll be telling MPs what he's achieved and what's left to do. But Anne, you're in Berlin, the country in transition, and a key swing voter in all of this debate. So just before we talk about how Keir Starmer looks from a Westminster perspective, how does Keir Starmer look on the European stage in, arguably Europe's most important country?
Yes, indeed. I mean, Germany, with a new government coming in, Sam, under Friedrich Merz, Christian Democrat, which is coming together now in a grand coalition, a big coalition with Social Democrats. So it is in transition, as you say, a second Zeitenwende. But this time is very different with the UK. The last time we talked about Zeitenwende, I think the UK, Britain was really still on the Brexit naughty step as far as official Germany was concerned. Well, what a change I've witnessed this weekend being around political events and gatherings here in Berlin. Keir Starmer, huge profiles of him in the newspapers, TV running live footage, probably you're in some of it, standing outside Lancaster House covering that meeting. I was very struck by something that Arnim Laschet, former Christian Democrat leader, indeed a Chancellor candidate himself in the past, who was very, very respected here, saying, look, isn't it extraordinary that we have Europeans getting serious at last? That's great. And pointing out that was striking, he said, looking a bit discombobulated by that it was convened in the UK, but giving great credit to Keir Starmer for getting it together. So I would say it is the moment when Keir Starmer, or Keir Charmer, as the playbook calls him this morning, is really sort of getting out there among Europeans as someone who isn't just coming sort of saying, I'm really sorry about the Brexit thing. Can we get together again? You could, if you want to be provocative, say sort of that moment of transition from the Brexit world to the world of getting serious about European defence and a new era in Europe.
Talking to British officials after the Lancaster House summit yesterday, it was clear that there is a quiet confidence about the way that their man has conducted themselves. They believe that he is the man for the moment with the temperament necessary for the moment, and that seems to be chiming around the place. It strikes me he did very well in lots of areas, but there is one big question about territory that we need to come on to later, which is sort of the biggest sticking point in all of that. But that's for later, and I'll be asking Anne in a moment whether Germany is part of Keir Starmer's coalition of the winning. But because we are a domestic podcast, I'm afraid we very, very quickly, and I promise it'll be quick, have to attend to some other business just to run through everything about the week ahead. And do you want to start with Monday?
Yes, indeed. Well, on the domestic front today sees Keir Starmer meeting representatives from the defence industry. Then there will be a statement to the Commons wrapping up the last few days, and yet another white paper on leasehold reform. We may feel that we've heard that a few times, Sam.
Certainly have. On Tuesday, Shrove Tuesday, of course, there's another farmers' protest, so get ready for that in Westminster. Rachel Reeves is meeting manufacturers, and Lord Peter Hendy is doing something on HS2, Britain's belated massive jumbo infrastructure project.
Wednesday is PMQ's Day, and Andrew Bailey, Governor of the Bank of England, is before the Treasury Select Committee then.
Thursday is a big day for the EU. That's when the summit is going to take place, where we find out more of EU countries' plans for defence spending. There were hints about that when Ursula von der Leyen walked before the cameras yesterday outside Lancaster House. But will the reality, when the rubber hits the road, really match the rhetoric that we have heard?
And Rachel Reeves is on a visit then. She'll be giving interviews, so we might hear some of the answer.
That's the week, but the domestic does feel somewhat secondary for another week in a row. That's the theme of 2025. There's always a danger when the domestic agenda feels secondary, because there are just really complicated, knotty problems at home, and they do slightly become secondary when the spotlight's off them. But never mind. Today is all about Keir Starmer and his role on the world stage, and he's going to be in the Commons answering questions about it. Now, I sort of think, and the point of this podcast is to work out where things go next, rather than particularly to chew over the past. Forwards, not back, as a well-known politician once said. And I suppose that for me, diplomacy is the intersection of optimism with the possible. One of the things I've been doing this weekend for Sky is just going through the major events that they've been, picking out clues for why actually there is a path forward, there is a way forward, and actually if you look hard enough, you can find them. So I went through Friday lunchtime's meltdown 40-minute exchanges with Donald Trump, JD Vance and President Zelenskyy, with a view to seeing how somebody like Peter Mandelson would look at them. And actually there are quite a lot of takeaways before the famous last 10 minutes descended into a slanging match about who had the cards and whether or not it would make great television, that suggested that for all that the peace negotiation has slowed and uncertainty has risen, there are the building blocks for where everybody would agree we need to go next on this. Okay, what do I mean? Well, first of all, I thought it was quite significant that Trump in that meeting said he was absolutely committed to NATO and the eastern flank of Europe, right? That might not be a given at this point, but in that Friday exchange, Donald Trump went out of his way to say, I'm very committed to Poland. They've paid more. We are committed to NATO. He says the Europeans have to step up with defence spending, but he reiterated his commitment to NATO very, very firmly. And in all of the rest of the noise, I think that really matters. The second sort of cause for some optimism, or grounds to build, is that clearly Donald Trump has internalized this idea that Britain and France will provide some kind of security sort of help for Ukraine. The point that Keir Starmer wanted to make to him on Thursday has landed, and he was repeating back at the cameras the idea that Britain and France would submit troops. And he hinted that the US were going to join in with a security guarantee. He even started a sentence that began, we could conceivably, and then kind of paused. He has an idea in his head what the security guarantee from the US looks like. He just doesn't want to say it in public yet. But the fact that it exists at all, I think, is really, really important. And then thirdly, it's absolutely clear he wants this item solved. He wants to be the person that brokers a deal. He wants it as an issue behind it. It's not dominating the US papers in the way that it's dominating European conversations, understandably, but it is a thorn and a block, but also an opportunity for him to get his Nobel Peace Prize or his reputation as being the master of the art of the deal or whatever. But capitalizing on that will be very important. So those three things, his actual commitment to NATO and European defence, the fact that there is a plan in his head for security in Ukraine, and the fact he wants a solution that, that does mean the door isn't closed, I think. Where do you think that leaves us, Anne?
Well, I think that's really clear, and it's a good point that I think the shock that people felt and disappointment in the way that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was treated by President Trump and by the Vice President J.D. Vance possibly blinded us to what you're laying out, that there is still some sort of an intention and a plan coming from the White House that isn't just having rows with the benighted Ukrainian leader, and that European security is at the heart of it. The only, I suppose, reality check that I might offer there, and I think it's inherent in a story, a sort of side story that popped up about Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, the new UK ambassador to the US, that the mood music matters, the human interactions matter. So I think you're absolutely right to lay out that is where the White House would like things to go, but things can easily go off track, and they can go off track with such a reactive president, and I should say as well, a reactive leader of Ukraine who feels just very badly treated. So Starmer's man in DC, Peter Mandelson, called on Zelenskyy and European leaders in an interview with an American network to give unequivocal backing to the initiative President Trump is taking to end the war. So he went a bit further, Sam, than a lot of other people with that word unequivocal, which kind of sounded as if he thought that the Ukrainian side also, needed to step back a bit from their hot and heavy tone about what had happened. A lot of opposition figures in the UK, including Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, the former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, was quite active in this debate about ending the war and wants to support Ukraine, jumped on those remarks last night, and then there was a statement back from a spokesman from the Peter Mandelson's end of the story, saying this was hair splitting. Of course, he was on the same page as Keir Starmer. I think in substance, nobody doubts that, but it just does show that people phrase things differently, and it can take one phrase that goes a bit off track or is heard differently by the other party for all of those steps, those three steps that you laid out there so well, to just kind of come a cropper or get held up, delayed, or someone else to sort of come in from perhaps outside and say, well, hang on, this isn't what we meant by X or Y.
Yes, I do completely agree with that. And I think that Mandelson's intervention on the telly yesterday morning actually helped show us where the differences are, just as what was going on Friday, Saturday helped show us where the gap could be closed. Look, Keir Starmer did a very good job closing some of the gaps and getting people rhetorically on the same page. At the press conference yesterday afternoon, Keir Starmer didn't go as far as Peter Mandelson, and that was evident from space. He didn't call on Ukraine publicly to back a ceasefire immediately, just as he didn't echo the words of Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who said that Volodymyr Zelenskyy should effectively apologise, which Zelenskyy made clear last night, not least to my colleague Yalda Hakim in that late night press conference, that he wasn't going to do. But there is an area, I think, which looks to me as problematic as it always was, and it's not a problem that has resulted from Friday's meltdown, but is just a massive fundamental difference that I can't yet see how is bridged amongst, for all of the good work of Keir Starmer, and that is this. Yesterday, on the American networks, Trump's own national security advisor was very, very clear. Now this is Mike Waltz, and he said to CNN, he was asked about the ultimate deal between Ukraine and Russia, and he said, this will clearly be some kind of territorial concession for security guarantees going forward. Now, if true, that means Ukraine having to give up some of the territory it has lost because of the invasion of Russia 3 years ago, and potentially some of the land it lost as part of the invasion of Crimea in 2014, right? That is massive. And that is not something that Europeans have at all countenanced, it seems to me. The question is until now. Yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen came out with exactly the opposite point of view. So she walked out of the Lancaster House summit and she said, it's our message to America is that we're ready to defend democracy and to defend the principle that there is a rule of law and you cannot invade a neighbour, cannot change borders with force, right? So you've got the president of the European Commission say you can't change borders with force. You've got the US National Security Advisor saying Ukraine might have to give up territory because of force. So then look at the press conference. Keir Starmer only referred much more broadly to Ukraine's sovereignty, not spelling out what that meant in terms of borders, what they're defending. The question is, the UK official language on Ukraine's territorial integrity looks to me like it's shifted. Previously, Russia had to, quote unquote, be defeated. Now, much more vaguely, its sovereignty needs to be protected. Now, it might sound like a small shift, but that could involve the ceding or not of land from Ukraine to Russia, which is massive and is sort of the whole principle that people have been battling on. Are people changing sides? Is the actual takeaway, and for Ukraine, that the Europeans are leaning into the kind of deal that they wouldn't have countenanced 3 months ago?
To an extent, I see it a little bit differently because I've been following what Zelenskyy himself has been saying, particularly about Crimea. And he has, I think, been making it, sometimes he's thought to be a bit of a kind of blunt speaker, as we saw in that showdown with Donald Trump. But he has been signalling over the last weeks, he's said of Crimea that Ukraine lacks the strength to retake Crimea militarily. He's been signalling, he uses a formulation somewhere, he says, that it can only come back by diplomatic pressure from the international community. Well, that is a kind of way of, I think, accepting tacitly that Crimea, and I think this has been known, frankly, by the conduct of the war and where we are with the map of the war for some time, that Crimea is the most sort of vulnerable part to staying under Russian control. I think where you're really on it is that this question about, say, the Donbass and those territories which were seen as part of a sort of territorial integrity that you couldn't give up may now come into play. Personally, I think Crimea has been, in a sense, gone for some time, and that Zelenskyy is signaling that. Of course, he will never say it belongs to Russia, but it will become a kind of frozen conflict, and it will be sort of left to future generations to sort out. So I think there is more flexibility on the Ukrainian side than sometimes reflected in the Western media, but it also comes down to the how, doesn't it? That it's one thing for Zelenskyy to say, well, I've got all these other guarantees. We've sorted out this mineral rights argument that keeps going to and fro, and I've made up. Olive Branch has gone both ways with the Trump administration, and now we're thinking about how we deal with these difficult sort of territories where Russia is in control. To saying, like, you're on your own. The Europeans are saying, well, we'd love to help you, but we can't really get in there. So I think that is what we're going to see in the next weeks, is a clarification of the kind of questions that you were putting on the table there.
I think it is one thing if there is a certain ceding of the post-2014 redrawn boundaries. It strikes me that it's altogether more difficult, as you're just saying, if parts of the territory that Russia has gained through the invasion post-2022 end up permanently in Russia's hands. And the shifting of Keir Starmer's language is visible from space. There is a danger that for all of his good work over the last few days, in the end, perhaps he's the person that made it easier for the US to lean more towards Russia's side than anybody would have wanted at most points in this conflict. Look, in the end, Anne, Keir Starmer is having to make a bet on Donald Trump's intentions and personality that in the end, bringing Putin to the negotiating table will result in a better deal for Ukraine. But in the end, he doesn't know exactly the nature of how Donald Trump is going to deal with President Putin. So it is a risk, and we just don't know quite what's going to happen.
And he doesn't know how his peacekeepers are really going to go down. You know, this is, I think, the other aspect of this, that in order to keep on the front foot, as you're suggesting, with Donald Trump and walking that line, which is difficult enough, at the same time actually trying to figure out what a peacekeeping mission looks like. So interesting watching here from Germany. Sam, we're talking about coalitions of the willing. What about the coalitions of the willing but not very able? Now, that's exactly where I would say Germany is. I've seen those a lot in journalism, but to be more serious, the Germans will, I think, go a very long way, much further than they've gone in the past. I think France militarily is sort of a bit on the same page as the UK. It's kind of happy to sort of get in there if we can get to a deal on what peacekeeping should look like. But in Germany, where you really had a report recently, a big one, as the new government gets ready to come in, saying that the army is kind of 50% ready for any conflict. I mean, 50% ready is not going to cover anything like, and neither do the troop numbers in Germany. We have our own problems with that in the UK, but it's really very, very difficult here. And you have public opinion that probably doesn't like it very much either, the idea of any military backup or intervention. That would be a very interesting, a jeopardous moment for any German government. Money, yeah, you can sort out money. When it comes material, fine. Men, very difficult.
And I keep repeating, so I'm blue in the face, you cannot have troops on the Ukrainian-Russian front line, because you cannot have UK troops firing at Russian troops. Otherwise, we are at war with Russia. And how do you construct a peacekeeping force if that's not the case? I don't quite understand that. That's a question for another day, because you'll have just heard the timer go off. Thank you very much indeed, Anne. Absolutely fascinating. We'll be back in 24 hours' time with another update. See you then.
On time, on budget, Sam.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.